Once upon a time, in a deep and tranquil forest, there was a small monastery known as the Monastery of Serenity. The head of this monastery was a person of generous and easygoing nature. Every day, he would take peaceful walks, enjoying the fresh air of the serene forest. The Monastery of Serenity was always peaceful. Thanks to this, the head monk enjoyed leisurely days. He had no other duties. His daily routine consisted of eating delicious food, taking walks, and indulging in sweet afternoon naps. Gradually, the head monk began to gain weight. Bit by bit, he became rounder and rounder. Meanwhile, the king of that land was incredibly busy, scarcely having a moment to breathe. No matter how hard he worked, his tasks seemed only to multiply, giving him no respite. His head throbbed with the weight of endless responsibilities, and he grew thinner and more fatigued each day. The more he toiled, the angrier he became, especially when he thought of the abbot of the local monastery, who always appeared calm and untroubled. One day, driven by his frustration, the king decided to visit the abbot. "Listen, abbot," the king said, his voice tinged with a mix of envy and curiosity. "You always seem so relaxed. Moreover, you're getting plumper and your face is positively glowing. Meanwhile, I'm growing thinner by the day. I must admit, I'm quite envious. What is your secret to such a peaceful existence?" Unaware of the dissatisfaction hidden in the king's words, the abbot mistook his remarks for praise. Delighted by what he believed to be a compliment, the abbot responded cheerfully to the king. "I worry about nothing and always keep a positive outlook on life. That's why I am free from worries. If I have any concern, it's only that my increasing weight sometimes makes it hard to breathe. Ha ha ha. Your Majesty, you are always busy with so many tasks, which is why you're losing weight. I'm worried you might lose your health as well. Perhaps, Your Majesty, you could try to relax your mind occasionally and set aside your troubles for a moment." After listening quietly to the abbot's words, the king returned to the palace with a curious expression on his face. Over time, the abbot's words began to irritate him more and more. "How dare he speak to me in such a manner? He takes my concerns lightly, as if mocking me." The king then devised a plan. "Then I shall teach him a lesson and see if he can still smile after this." The king sent a servant to urgently summon the abbot to the palace. The portly abbot arrived at the palace, gasping for breath, and the king greeted him as though he was pleased to see him. "Welcome, abbot. You are so wise that you seem to have no worries at all, so I intend to test your wisdom. I will pose 3 questions to you. You have 3 days to answer them, and I expect your answers by 10 o'clock the morning after next." Since even the king's worries seem trivial to you, solving these problems should not be difficult. The abbot looked puzzled as he listened to the king. "I will give you 3 questions. First, when I wear my finest ceremonial robe, don a silk cape, and put on my golden crown, what is the total value of all these items? Second, where is the center of the world? Third, what will I be thinking about at 10 o'clock the morning after next? If you bring me the correct answers to these 3 questions, I will reward you with gold equal to your weight. However, if you fail to solve even one of these problems, you will be imprisoned in the palace dungeon for taking the king lightly." The abbot's face turned pale. He thought the situation was absurd. but he dared not contradict the king's words. From the moment the abbot stepped outside the royal palace, he racked his brain for answers to the king's questions. He thought and thought, turning ideas over in his mind, but no solution appeared. The monks at the monastery saw the abbot staggering in, looking distraught. "What is the matter, abbot?" Overwhelmed by despair, the abbot shared with the monks the events of his day at the palace. It was as if a thunderbolt had struck the once peaceful monastery. The monks were shocked and quickly gathered around to start solving the 3 problems posed by the king. They debated all night but couldn't unravel the mysteries. One monk finally spoke up. "We haven't been able to figure out any leads on these problems. Since we have little time, we should gather the wisdom of everyone in the monastery as soon as day breaks." Everyone nodded in agreement. And when morning came, the abbot assembled all the people of the monastery and explained the previous day's events and the king's 3 questions. "Therefore, we must find the answers by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. If we fail, I will be sent to prison." After the abbot finished speaking, a heavy silence fell over the monastery. Then, a loud voice broke the stillness. "May I speak?" The voice came from a small, thin gardener holding garden shears. Anything but a discussion about garden weeds is welcome. The abbot was desperate enough to grasp at straws. "If you grant me one request, I can solve these problems for you." The abbot, intrigued, listened attentively to the gardener. "Tell me what you need." "Allow me to appear before the king tomorrow morning wearing your white robe." Everyone looked at the gardener in surprise. The abbot's robe was sacred and meant only for him. In their desperate situation, the abbot agreed to the gardener's request. The next day, the gardener donned the abbot's robe and set off for the palace. The robe was too long and dragged on the ground, and the attached hood hung low over his eyes. Despite the discomfort from the oversized garment, the gardener arrived at the palace right on time. When the palace guard tried to stop him, the gardener said, "I am from the monastery. I have come to see His Majesty. Please convey that message." Hearing this, the king, thinking the abbot had arrived, quickly changed into his most expensive and splendid clothes, adorned with gold, silver, and diamonds, ample to display his regal dignity. Once ready, the king ordered the guards to let the abbot in. As the gardener entered the palace, his hat slipped down, nearly covering his face, and everyone failed to conceal their surprise. The gardener's gait was awkward, and the robe continuously swept the floor. Instead of the abbot's usual plump figure, the thin silhouette of the small body inside the robe caused murmurs among the palace folk. The king was surprised, but inwardly sneered, thinking the gardener's emaciated body was a result of the stress from pondering his riddles. He must have suffered greatly while worrying about the problems I posed. How much must he have stressed to have lost so much weight so quickly? "Everyone be quiet," commanded the king. The room fell silent. "Now, abbot, let us begin with the questions." The king, with a solemn voice, asked the first question. "Tell me, what is the value of all the things I am currently wearing?" The gardener answered without even glancing at the king's lavish attire. "Exactly 29 pieces of silver." The gardener's answer made the court gasp in disbelief. The royal hall buzzed with shock and murmurs. People loudly scolded the gardener. "Are you out of your mind? Just 29 pieces of silver?" The gardener continued, "Yes, exactly 29 pieces of silver. Our Lord Jesus Christ was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Your Majesty's garments, no matter how precious, cannot exceed the 30 pieces of silver." People were stunned into silence by his words. The king thought for a while before speaking. "Ah, well answered. Let's move on to the second question. Where is the center of the world?" Without hesitation, the gardener placed a stone at the king's feet. "Right here. Beneath your Majesty's feet is the center of the world, because where the king stands is indeed the center of the universe." The people were once again amazed and fell silent. The king, inwardly surprised but maintaining composure, posed the final question. "You have answered well so far, but if you fail the last problem, it all means nothing. Continue to answer well." The third question, "Tell me, what am I thinking at this very moment?" the gardener calmly replied. "Your Majesty, you think I am the abbot." "So you are the abbot, aren't you? You're not saying you're not the abbot." Then the gardener began to remove the robe. "Your Majesty, I am but the gardener of the monastery." As he shed the robe, the gardener's slender body was revealed, dressed in humble attire. Everyone in the palace was once again taken aback and couldn't hide their astonishment. "Not only your Majesty, but everyone here thought I was the abbot." Then the eldest advisor spoke up. "Your Majesty, he is right. Not only you, but we also mistook him for the abbot. This gardener has perfectly answered all 3 questions. You must acknowledge it." The king paused for a moment, then laughed heartily. "Ha ha ha, indeed. Very clever. I must admit, this gardener has completely fooled us all. But I'm rather pleased. Lucky he's just a skinny gardener, for if it had been the real abbot, there might not have been any gold left in the palace." The king ordered his ministers to give the gardener gold equal to his weight. The ministers filled 2 bags with gold, equal to the weight of the gardener. The king then commanded his servants to escort the gardener back to the monastery with the bags of gold. When the gardener returned to the monastery with the 2 bags of gold, the abbot was overjoyed. He ran out barefoot to greet the returning gardener and hugged him repeatedly, saying thank you over and over. After all, the gardener had saved him from almost going to prison. The entire monastery community rejoiced together. The abbot and the gardener used the gold received from the king to buy grapevines and planted them in a sunny field near the monastery. Both the abbot and the gardener, along with all the monastery's people, carefully tended the vines, which grew healthy and strong. Every fall, the vast vineyard bore clusters of succulent, sparkling red and purple grapes. When that time came, the sweet fragrance of the grapes carried on the wind, spreading throughout the monastery. The abbot and the gardener carefully selected the ripest grapes and lovingly crafted wine, which they then filled in large barrels and sent to the king. They hoped the wine would soothe the king's weariness from his royal duties. The king savored the delicious sweet wine they sent and reflected on the events of the year. With each sip of wine, all his worries and fatigue seemed to melt away. From somewhere a sweet grape fragrance blows in. It was the wise gardener. Have a good night, everyone.